Sweetie, are you sure everything is all right? Rita asked, glancing down at her 4-year-old daughter, who sat quietly in the stroller. I'm fine, Lola replied, in a bitter tone. A hard scowl, that was all that could be seen on her face, since she returned to her mother from the playground. It was by pure coincidence that she happened to overhear the Degarity remarks that directed her at her. But she was thankful that her mother had decided to get her out of the house to try and cheer her up. I should have listened to Mommy instead. I ended up looking like a fool, all because I listened to that. Lola balled her tiny fists. That jerk! As her feelings had changed from simmering annoyance to burning outrage, she fidgeted in her stroller for a bit before her forehead began to turn a light shade of red. She had half of their mind to jump out and run back to the park to ruin Lindsay's pretty little face. They were only a few blocks away after all, but she could really run that far? Lynn might be able to, seeing as she couldn't sit more than just 2 seconds. Not to mention, she was doing soccer one of these days, and by the time she got there, she probably got tired and worn out, and looked like a hot mess, and she would be outnumbered if Lindsay's friends were still there. And the last thing Lola wanted was to give the red-haired girl another excuse to beat her down. As Rita opened the front door, Lola got out of her seat and ran for the stairs. The mother of 10 let out a long sigh. Well, that didn't work. Her gaze went from upstairs to the wall to the master bedroom as the Marach spotted the current baby of the family. With a crayon in hand, the little brunette was doodling on the wall. Rita bit her own lip before marching over to the toddler. Lisa? The small child fidgeted as she turned towards the stern-faced mother. I told you not to write. She paused as she looked at what her baby made. Rather than expecting a simple doodle, there were numbers and equations that reminded her of math classes she took in high school. Trigonometry on the wall? And that is that? The 1-year-old woman squinted her eyes. Calculus? What in the world? She scratched her head in confusion. But it's fun, Lisa pouted, looking towards the wall. And I want to find out what X is. In spite of the child's brain power punching well above her age, Rita wasn't too fond of having to scrub crayon off the wall for the 3rd time this week. We have blank papers. You could have asked one of your siblings to find you some. Lisa made a frown. They didn't know where it was, or they wouldn't help. Rita pursed her lips as she took a bit of that info. The papers she was referring to were stored in the attic, along with a bunch of other things that the family rarely used. Since the kids never go up there, it wouldn't be expected of them to find writing paper. As far as just refusing to help, well, that could be also a number of reasons regardless. One look at the wall reminded her of that very second wasted another moment that the crayon marks were allowed to seep into the wall, to the point of requiring the whole area to be repainted. Well, I can help you find some paper, but first I need to help you clean this up. The Marach spoke calmly. Upstairs, Lola stomped to her shared bedroom. Back in those days, the room was much less crowded, and the twins had yet to fully embrace hobbies that they've come to recognize for Lola and Lana to be in separate beds. Unlike the princess-styled bed Lola would have later, she slept in an average twin bed while her older by 5 minutes sister. Used frustration irradiated from the heating unit as Lola kicked one of the plastic chairs parked onto the tiny table in the middle of the room. Soon jumping onto her bed and lying face down, Lola unleashed a muffled scream into the bedsheets, pounding the mattress with her feet, resulting in those noises to be drawn from the attention of one of the certain sibling who happened to be passing by her door. So, that's why you were so angry at the time? Lincoln asked. The moment of realization struck him. Lola nodded. It would have been different if I was just upset on how I messed up my first big pageant. Her brows arched down slightly. But hearing Lindsay gloat about how she tricked me, I just want to get back at her any way I could. Lincoln squinted an eye. Well, didn't you beat her up when you got the chance? As I said, I really want to, but my mom took us so far away from the park by then, Lola explained. A 9-year-old Lincoln poked his head in after hearing a muffled cry. You okay, Lola? The 4-year-old shot her head up and gave her brother the hardest glare she could muster. Not now, Lincoln. She promptly shoved her head back into the mattress. The white-haired child flinched at the girl's attitude. He glanced around as he contemplated whether he should ignore her demand and try to help, or heed her advice and leave. The blonde made a low growl from her position in bed, making Lincoln inclined to take the new second option. Now that I think of it, it would have been better if I had told you what happened then and there. Lola glanced at the floor in guilt. And I shouldn't have yelled at you. Lincoln then raised a hand. It's fine. I mean, you were really upset and didn't want to be around anyone. He couldn't help but frown. At least there's a better way to reason that what Lori and Lenny did. Lola made a curt nod before continuing on with her memory. Breathing in, Lola sat up on her bed, an annoyed frown still marked on her face. She didn't appear as angry as she previously was. Still, she couldn't let things stand the way they were. Lola didn't quite understand the true definition of revenge, but she felt such a burning desire for payback, and it was all she could think about. Lindsay needed to know how Lola felt that day. The embarrassment and humiliation of messing up that routine in front of hundreds of people, not to mention losing 2 of her front teeth when she accidentally hit herself. Rita may have been the dental assistant, but that didn't mean it had to hurt her in scissors to pulled out earlier than they should have been. I'm going to wipe that stupid smirk off of her face. And when it meant to have her in scissors pulled out earlier. But of course, that will show her, Lola grumbled. The problem, though, was how she intended to do that. It wasn't like she could just go ahead and start a fight with her the next time she saw her, which would likely be her next pageant practice. Mommy and Daddy wouldn't be very happy if Lola got into a fight, and she wouldn't get kicked out of the running. So, if I can't just hit her, Lola gripped her sheets, I'll have to beat her in my next pageant. She groaned before lying down. How am I supposed to do that? She's been in pageants longer than I have. Her eyes narrowed. But then again, if I just remember what Mommy said, I wouldn't have tripped. The younger girl's eyes shot open as a thought came to her at that one, the one that might just turn her tide in favor. But what if I just have her slip her up? She rubbed her chin at thought. Lincoln had an unsettling feeling as he remembered the time Lola wanted to join the other siblings' secret club. When that went a little, though Miss Cute pageant holding practice, just about the contestants, where Feld held led at the very mention of her name, except for Lindsay Sweetwater, and had a feeling that she was about to find out why that little tempered girl hated Lola so much. On the other hand, given what Lola explained to herself about her big pageant, her sister was justified for her actions. Sure, Lola had a bit of a habit of going overboard whenever she went on an attack, but Lincoln had to admit to himself that after that, he'd be known to what Lindsay did to his sister back then. He would have stepped in and helped Lola out. It might have prevented Lola from becoming a thinner and arguably meaner version of his oldest sister. But that was all hindsight that couldn't change what happened in the past. What did you do? The boy asked, having the memories of the next pageant Lola was referring to. I don't remember hearing anything bad happening. Well, before I became the girl you know as me today, I was still up in the whole blackmail game, but I felt that it was better to try and get her head like she did with me. I didn't want to risk getting banned from the pageant because I beat her up. Lola shifted slightly in her seat. That would have come later on from what I remember. Is that the reason why the contestants are scared of you? Lincoln asked. Lola made a hum and thought, I guess, right now, I'm not even sure of the exact reason. Deciding to continue on. Anyways, practice came and went like usual. I kept my distance from Lindsay since I didn't want to be around her, and she seemed to pretend I didn't exist anymore, probably because she didn't see me as a threat. The 6-year-old frowned, but that would lead her to her undoing. The big day to which had finally arrived, the Little Miss Cutie pageant Lola was due to take part in. She practiced time after time during rehearsal and at home to perfect her routine with her staff, which now involved the inclusion of the 9-inch ribbon tied to one end. Whenever Lola had been at rehearsal for the pageant, she kept her distance from the rest of the competitors unless required to be near them, under the supervision of the pageant director. She felt as if there were hardly anyone she could trust. It made her nervous. Sometimes she wished that Lana was with her, Rita or Lynn Sr. wouldn't be nearby with the other parents at least. But it didn't offer the level of comfort that she would have gained being around her siblings. The anxiety she felt wasn't bad early on in the week, as the pageant was only 2 weeks away. But as the day of the real deal drew closer, Lola felt butterflies in her stomach burn as the growing intensively. For one, the whole family would be in attendance for this time of her life support. Last time it was just her parents and Lenny. Sort of that stung in the other siblings weren't interested in beauty other pageants like she was. Although Lynn, apparently Lana and Lola figured they wouldn't. Lynn wouldn't be such of a brute sometimes, but her twin appeared to be taking cues from her. The baths after being in the mud were starting to pile up. Lori might have gone, but someone needed to watch the others while the other parents were out. Still, with everyone planning to attend, Lola had made a certain nail to her routine to a point that she was comfortable she could pull it off. Another repeat of her last performance wasn't what she needed. But her main concern was how she was running out of time to get her scheme to get back at her new enemy, Lindsay Sweetwater. Lola may have stayed far away enough from the other girls not to be bothered, but as she kept within earshot, she can even learn a thing or two of her advisory. After all, she had seen Lincoln do it so many times playing ace detective or whatever it was, and it worked in his favor when trying to solve a crime. The last incident he solved involved who broke the cookie jar in the cabinet. Many assumed to be Lynn, but it turned out to be Luna of all people. She was hungry one night and accidentally dropped it while fishing for a snack. She was even as far as to borrow Lincoln's ace detective themed voice recorder to be better at her chances. Lincoln made a curt frown. So that's why I couldn't find it for months. Lola sunk into her bed slightly. I forgot where I had it left back then, but I found it in one of my stuffed teddy bears. Despite all of her efforts, Lola felt that she didn't gain her edge over her newly christened rival. Sure, she may have learned not to fall for the redhead's tricks, but she needed to get away into her head like Lindsay did to her. After all, fair is fair in a war. At least that's what Lori and when Lola eavesdropped on her while she was doing her homework. And who knew the young blonde would catch her lucky break on the day of the pageant? Lola was wrangling her staff in her hands, dressed in a pink ballerina outfit with a frilly skirt she was due to perform soon. The introduction phase went without an issue, along with the catwalk phase and how would you take the world for a better place questioning. But she had grown to know those moments were just small piece medals compared to what really mattered. The talent portion, Will Lola had confident in updating her routine. She wouldn't shake one little aspect that normally happens in front of dozens of other people. Stage fright. Taking a peek through the side of the curtain, the young blonde eyed at the crowd. It was mostly full an auditorium, likely due to the fact that this competition comprised of contestants of neighboring towns. The loud spotted her family sitting in one of the middle rows. Parents along with Lori, Lenny, Luann, Luna, and Lincoln were waiting in anticipation, each supportive grin on their faces. Luann appeared to be saying something which caused Lori, Lincoln, and Lynn to roll their eyes. It was likely a pun, something that the recently braced girl fried out more and more frequently. Closing the curtain. Okay, Lola, you got this. Just remember what you practiced, and everything should go fine. She glanced over to where the other contestants are, namely the red-headed girl she loathed, her brows furrowed. And don't let Miss Fake Nice Meanie get to you. Lola peeked out of the curtain again. The girl before her, Martha Brown, was almost finished with her act. Talent action sections were often regarded as being the most fun and almost most bizarre. There were a lot of ways that you could surprise the audience with a skill set that they weren't expecting. On this case, Marfa was juggling no less than 6 bowling pins on that of the one-wheeled bike that Lola couldn't place the name for. The Loud closed the curtain before walking to the other side of the stage. This didn't go unnoticed by one girl who she didn't want to hear. "Break a leg, Lola," Lindsay cheered, with a tone that sounded sweet yet carrying mocking tone. Lola growled, but didn't regard the girl as she stomped past, right as she was about to hearing rage. "Anyway, there's no way I'm taking first today." Lola squinted her eye as her pace slowed. "Well, duh, you got this in your bag," spoke another girl, who Lola didn't notice glanced back. "Sure, I got the skills," Lindsay agreed, but around the others, they were seriously packing in the talent department. I mean, Marfa's out there with a juggling act, and she's killing it out there. As if on cue, chorus of cheers were heard from the crowd. The turquoise-dressed girl grinned as she chuckled escaped her. "But thankfully I made some arrangements before the pageant started." Lola raised a brow before walking a little closer, taking a shelter behind the dress rack. Digging into the back of her dress, she pulled out what looked like an Ace-Savvy pen. In reality, it was a small voice recorder. She pressed a button on top and the red light on the side had been activated. Once Lola was certain that the recorder was working, she held up to make sure that she could hear the two girls' conversations without interference. "Like what?" the girl asked in a curious tone. "Oh, just loosening up a few floorboards here and there," Lindsay boasted. "Not enough so that will hit someone, but you can bet there will be a few missteps." She chuckled darkly. "By the time I go out there, should be noticeable me to avoid them." Again, as if on cue, a sudden crash was heard from the other side of the curtain. This was followed immediately with the several objects dropping to the floor. The few of the girls opened up the spot of the curtain out of curiosity, allowing Lola to see that Marfa had fallen off of her one-wheeled bike thing, and bowling pins juggled, scattered around the floor. The girl slowly got up, excited and groaned as she rubbed her back. Several people in the audience winced at her fall, but the judges were at least respectful, giving her a total of 22. Marfa made a quick bow before collecting her things and moved off the stage. As she left, Lola squinted her eyes. In the area where Marfa was riding on her bike thingy, the edges were some sort of floorboards connected to each other, dipped inward. Not enough to be noticeable by the judges or anyone else in the seats, but they looked as if they collapsed enough just to cause Marfa to lose her balance. The Loud gritted her teeth. Not only was Lindsay a total jerk, but also a cheater? Lola stopped as she was recording as a few moments before a growl escaped her throat. Her first instinct was to forget about the pageant and go stalk Lindsay and smug her face, but before she could do that, "Let's give another round of applause for Marfa!" "Now with that stuggling, jungling act, no, the finisher needs just a little work," the contest manager stated before pulling up a folded piece of paper out of her pocket. "Now then, let's welcome Lola Loud, who will get a chance to show us her ribbon dance." "I think I remember this one," Lincoln spoke. "Didn't you get a 30 for your dance?" "I did," Lola nodded. The near 5-year-old appeared from behind the curtain, nervous yet cute, as she was plaster on her face that appeared to be enhanced by her missing incisors. She gave a quick bow, taking a note where the floorboards had come loose when doing so. She then launched her routine in the act as the manager started the music. "I kept track of where all the floorboards had caved in and did my best to avoid them," Lola explained as her past self jumped and twirled the staff in hand, making the ribbon appear more as if it was wrapping itself on her form. The whole time, though, I noticed Lindsay poking her fat head out of the curtain, just waiting for me to slip up. Lola made a huff, then grinned as the idea popped in her head, making her jump. She landed directly at the edge of the loose floorboard before using it to spring jump higher in the air, doing more twirls that made frills of her dress spread out. But too bad for her, she had no idea that I had caught on to her plan, and I flew gracefully in the air like a fairy. Lincoln couldn't help but feel the light-hearted smile appearing on his face. "Honestly, I thought you had started taking exercise tips from Lynn." Lola giggled. As if I was never going to get a taste of that boot camp coming from her. Lola continued her dance for another few minutes, using a level of grace, handling her step in creative ways that managed to win over a majority of the audience. She came to a finish as she landed on her feet and bowed in the crowd. Most of the audience, especially the Louds, cheered happily for her. The judges made her final deliberations and gave her a high score of 10 each, coming to about 30. She gave a hearty wave, admitted praise, and skipped off to the stage. While I was avoiding her at first, she came to me which was another bad move. For the first time in weeks, Lola Loud was in the total state of euphoria. Her confidence in her had been iffy for so long, she had nearly forgot how to make a proper smile. But she appraised that she did not only receive from her family, but the complete strangers as well. It made her heart flutter as she soaked in all like a sponge, given a slight content. She twirled in her staff in her hand before resting it against the crook of her neck. The young blonde's hips swayed as she owned the place. Was it heading to the changing rooms to slip into her gown? Walking across from the backstage, much of the other girls didn't pay attention to her, although a few, usually timid ones, gave her some praise for her performance. And she neared the dressing rooms, a low clapping sound grabbed her attention. Turning her head, the Loud found the smug redhead in her glory. "So you managed not to slip up this time," Lindsay said in her retrained acceptance. "Good job, but I'm sure it's just a fluke." She turned to leave. "Oh, really?" Lola answered, getting the girl to stop in her tracks. "It just seemed like you're a real fluke, that just a few girls happened to slip up out there." The blonde responded in a mocking tone. Lindsay glances back, somewhat of a nervous look, empathized by her change of posture. She gave a shrug seconds later. "Probably just too much wax." Lola played over the voice recorder out of her dress. "Or loose floorboards." She pressed the play button. Lindsay froze upon hearing her own voice. And now it was Lola's turn to have a smug grin, as the redhead's gaze from mildly concerned to full-blown shock as the short voice clip ended. "You really think you are clever, don't you?" Lola then put the voice recorder back. "You made me slip up on purpose just so you could win. And I didn't even do anything to you." Lindsay then opened her mouth to speak, but Lola silenced her with the accusative finger. "I heard what you said at that park that day, FYI, the Loud fumed, then composed herself. "But you obviously aren't as good as you may think you are if you have to cheat." Lindsay formed a glare. "What are you going to do? Rat me out? Do you think anyone else would believe you?" She folded her arms. "I could easily say you were the one who dug up the floor." Lola only smirked. "I have a recording, you don't." She then pointed the staff on the floor and used it for support. "And if you try, I have the real proof." Lindsay scrunched her face in hate-filled glare as she stepped towards her. "In 5 seconds you won't." Lola clenched her fist. She so wanted to take her staff and cram it down Lindsay's throat, but a quick look made her look down and think otherwise. She was still wearing that ballerina dress, and her mother had paid a lot of money to get her one for the pageant. Instead, when she was close enough, the Loud lifted her staff, jammed it right into Lindsay's gut. The redhead had no time to react, but the blunt end of the staff was dug into her stomach, making her kneel to the floor, and she was knocked out of her. The Loud turned to run into the dressing room. Lindsay looked up at her fleeing prey with growl before giving the chase. Reaching for the door, Lola threw it open and slammed it shut. Her body jolted as Lindsay slammed against the door and started banging on it. "Open this door right now!" the redhead yelled. "Make me!" Lola responded in a mocking tone. The door received a few kicks in response. Lindsay gave another yell, but it was muffled by the door. Lola giggled to herself, but as she did slid down, sat at the base of the door, feeling a large sense of accomplishment getting back at her of how her arch nemesis. Violence may have not been the answer, but this moment still put a huge smile on her face. Lindsay was so mad she flopped her performance. Lola giggled. Even better, she stepped on one of the boards, she missed it, and smacked her in the face. The young Loud burst into laughter, gripping the sides as she fell backwards on the couch seat. Lincoln raised a brow. "Then what happened? I was too busy playing my Game Boy to pay attention." Lola nodded. "I don't know if that's what helped, but I came in first place in that pageant. Lincoln nodded. Well, I guess that explains how she learned to get the dirt on people. But, as much as Lincoln didn't want to pivot the conversation towards something more negative, he still had felt he needed to know why Lola decided to use her tricks on her siblings. Okay, I get what you had to do, but what did you do with your pageants? But how did me and the others get roped into this? Lola's smile disappeared as her face became crestfallen. I figured, well, it had to work for my pageants. It could work at home, too. She pressed her hand against her cheek. I think I started off with Lana, since we usually are together at the most. I didn't think I need to actually find out her secrets per se. I just threatened to tell Mom and Dad about some of the things she broke. Lincoln deadpanned. I'm guessing you didn't like breaking the promise? He paused. If you guys made one. Lola nodded with some guilt. Yeah, and from there, I started moving towards everyone else. The middle child huffed slightly. Namely me? Well, not exactly. I mean, Lola paused, as she tried to figure out what her explanation is. It's just that you didn't really try to say no. Lincoln furrowed his brows slightly. I did say no, but you threatened to pummel me or use blackmail to make me play with you. He folded his arms. You could have just asked nicely and take no for an answer? Lola's heart sank. I did, but... I mean, Lincoln, no offense, but you tend to fold too easy. And you think I should be more like Lynn? Her brother replied with a more annoyed tone. No, Lola said quickly. If I may before things get a little hasty. Miranda then cut in before turning to Lola. Now, Lola, is it true that you've went to Lincoln for most of her help in the past? Asked. Yes. And what was the reason for it? I just wanted someone to play with, and sometimes I felt like he could help me out with some of this stuff for my pageants. The therapist nodded. Considering that you have two older sisters who may have some interest about your passion, wouldn't they be a better pick? I mean, it's not like I've tried asking for help. Lola folded her arms. Lori's usually too busy talking with her friends, or now her ex-boyfriend, to really care, and Lenny would sometimes help out, but... Judging by the cringe look on her face, Lincoln could only assume Lenny was much out of assistance, unless it was for a dress. Given what he knew of her now, he figured she was isn't on her medication at the time. So I decided to go to Lincoln, since he usually helps them out before, so I figured he might know something. The young blonde explained. I couldn't ask Lynn or Luann or Luna. They wouldn't care for any of that. Lincoln noticed something that she didn't mention Lucy, but she didn't need to. The brooding girl was Lola's opposite on stuff like this. But what about the constant tea parties? Lincoln asked. Lola felt silent for a moment to develop her answer. It's not like I have asked every day for you. More like once every few days, Lincoln pointed out, giving his younger sister a mean stare. Just because I'm the only guy in the house, that doesn't mean I'm your personal butler. After Miss Lopez glanced between the two, she could already see a potential conflict about to spill over. Lola felt that she was running out of room on how to go on justify her behavior. Lincoln didn't seem to notice how much pressure he was putting on the young girl in a semi-irate state, and so she decided on how good of a time it was to give her own input. Lincoln, Miranda started, grabbing the 6 to 11-year-old's attention. Do you recall what you and Lynn discussed about this? Lincoln's gaze fell. I do. I get that she wanted to make up for when we stopped hanging out, but I wish it went about it better. And from what I can assume now, your younger sister here has made you engage in tea parties just because she feels that you two won't do enough activities like you said you did in the past. And for that, it seems she values your opinion above everyone else. Lincoln deadpanned. I'm not in the family's fashion expert, but you do know a few things about the activities she's in, right? Well, yeah, but... Lincoln went silent as he pondered over his words. A few times I did help her out because I wanted to, but over the time it wasn't really something I'd invest in. His mouth pouted a little. Except for the prize that has 2-day passes at Dairyland. That one was obvious, Lola muttered. I didn't much care about the prize as much as just winning. And while you were on that subject, Lincoln, if you can, were there any points you remember from when you and Lola had spent time together? The good doctor asked. Lincoln repeatedly bumped his foot against the base of the couch as he dwelled on his memories. When Lucy had been born, he was rather excited to be given the role as big brother. He did introduce her to the supernatural after all, and he hopes that maybe she'd enjoy reading comics. While Lincoln's interest in ghosts was more of a side hobby, Lucy embraced it fully and soon went on from being a cheerful girl to always acting creepy, something he would admit that put him off hanging out with her at times. And while she didn't read comics, she was often busy reading your average novel. When the twins were born, he did his best to spend time with the both of them. As they grew, Lana felt something like her younger brother would do the same way Lynn was the older brother. But Lola, just a ball of sunshine for the first 4 years of her life, even before she started doing pageants, Lincoln could admit that Lola had the tendency to gravitate towards him. Maybe it was because he stood out as the only boy in the family so far? The twins had looked up to Lucy as an extent, but even she started getting absorbed into her supernatural stuff. Lana gravitated towards Lynn, and he assumed that Lola went towards Lenny. When we were younger, we were like she was up until maybe 4. I still remember we'd play together outside at the park whenever our parents would take us, Lincoln stated. I don't remember when we stopped, but I thought it was like... He fiddled with his cowlick. It happened around the same time she started getting into pageants. Aside from Ace Savvy, I really started to get into more and more comic series and video games. I have been hanging out with Clyde more and... Lincoln paused to give himself a moment to think. Whatever he wanted to believe it or not, Lola and Lynn were a bit more like they let on. Aside from having a temperamental attitude, inflated egos, they also shared a previous bond with their brother. At least he seemed to have forget as time went on. Sure, there were bits and pieces from the past years that still linger in the boy's mind. They only ever made themselves known once, making the orbit around his brain to reach the front so he could picture it as clearly. But as the family got bigger, the kids grew up, and Lincoln had long accepted the fact that his sisters had changed over the years. It probably wasn't as much as he could do to try and change them. Well, at the very least without trying. The whole ordeal with the picture was for his parents' anniversary came into mind. Granted, Lincoln would admit he was a tad, no way, overboard when he was trying to make the picture as perfect as possible, making Luna wear a wig, having Lenny and Lisa switch glasses, and even sometimes everyone wear Christmas sweaters during a warm May was overbearing. The boy's brows furrowed a bit. It wouldn't have killed him to stand for 30 seconds. Mom and Dad found the pictures heartwarming, but anyone else would think we're crazy. Glancing at his sister, Lincoln nibbled his lower lip. He didn't see the egotistic, spoiled girl Lola had just become after getting absorbed into her pageant game. Just like how Lynn wasn't into the same ego-driven, meat-headed jock. All of the time he sat was just a little girl who was scared and just wanted affection from her brother. This may be a running theme with your family, or at least those younger than you. Now Lola may not have words, but at least you can see why she became the way she is, right? Miranda asked. Lincoln's nose flared a bit as he chewed the inner side of his lip. Turning to Lola. Lola, were there other girls that were like Lindsay? A few, the young girl admitted. They weren't as persistent as she was, but I ended up having some use-acquired skills to get them off my back. I guess the word spread out to the few other girls, since no one really wants to associate? Lincoln asked. Lola snapped her fingers. Yeah, that word. They didn't want to be around me since they were afraid of what I would do to them if I got mad, which is weird because I usually don't get mad when I practice. Lincoln then squinted slightly. Maybe because you fight with Lana a lot, not even at school. Probably. Lola examined the nails on her fingers, bringing them up on the other hand on her index nail. I didn't mind it all in the first place. I like the idea of people being afraid of me, doing what I say and tending to my needs. She saw Lincoln's disapproving look and opted to change her tone. Okay, I know I spilled over in the house. The blonde furrowed her brows as a frustrated rose. But it was just fun, okay? She then threw her hands in the air. I won so many pageants and the prizes that I felt on top of the world. You may have felt the same way when you were on that limo one time.